Hey, I'm Jaylin Johnson, and along with my partners Ansley Simmons and Cattell, we will be presenting the chemical radium.
So what is radium? Radium is a silvery, lustrous, soft, intensely radioactive. It readily oxidizes on exposure to air, turning from almost pure white to black. Radium is luminescent, corrodes in water to form radium hydroxide. Although it is the heaviest member of the alkaline earth, it is the most volatile. The atomic number of radium is 88 and the atomic mass is 226. The half-life is 1600 years. The melting point is 700 degrees Celsius and the boiling point is 1140 degrees Celsius. There are many isotopes, 4 of which are found in nature, with the common one being radium-226. Radium and beryllium were once used as a portable source of neutrons. 92% of emitted radiation is given off as a form of alpha rays, 3.2% in the form of beta rays, and 4.8% in the form of gamma. It was also discovered by Marie and Pierre Curie.
So as it was mentioned earlier, radium has a bunch of different isotopes. Here are a few of the naturally occurring isotopes. We have radium-223, radium-224, radium-226, and radium-228. Also, these isotopes emit different rays. So the radium-223 decays in the alpha form, as well as radium-224 and 226. And so we see the half-life for these isotopes. And so radium-223 has 11.4 days, and then radium-224 has 3.6 days. And then radium-226 is 1,600 years. And so you can also see the decay energy that it takes. Because beta rays are more potent and they actually target the underlying tissues, we see a very low number.
So radium can have different effects on the body, but it enters the body by either being breathed in or swallowed. If it's in the lungs, it will get into the bloodstream and travel throughout the whole body. If it's swallowed, 80% is excreted through waste and feces, but 20% gets into the bloodstream. It will exit in small amounts through feces and waste. Exposure of high levels of radium can lead to anemia, cataracts in your eyes, fractured teeth and bones, cancers, and death. There are a few medical tests to determine radium exposure, such as a urine screening test.
In the early 1900s, there was a group of women who were referred to as the Radium Girls. This was because they became famous for their suit against the U.S. Radium Corporation, at which they worked as dial painters. They were responsible for painting the glow-in-the-dark numbers on wristwatches, which were becoming increasingly popular during World War I, as soldiers often dropped and broke their pocket watches during battle. These women ingested the radium by sharpening the tips of the paintbrushes, by pressing it between their lips, and swallowing the radium-tainted paint. They also used the paint to color their hair and nails and to create a glowing effect on their skin, especially the face. Once they began showing symptoms of the poisoning, anytime between a couple of months afterwards up to several years after ingesting it, the U.S. Radium Corporation claimed that they were not responsible, and many of the women died before trial was completed. This case led to Alexander Gettler, head toxicologist in New York City, using X-ray paper to determine the radium content in the victims' bones even 5 years after they died.
So here we have a pie graph that shows the common radium measurements that's found today. And we see the largest one in the red, which is 43%, and that's just radon, the natural internal exposure. And then next we see around 20% is medical exposure there in the green. After that, the 15% is the Earth gamma radiation, which is the natural external exposure. And then we go to 13% is cosmic rays, 8% is food and water sources, and then other is 1% in the black.
Just like any other toxin, radium can also affect the environment. And so radium is constantly produced by the radioactive decay of uranium and thorium. It presents low levels in rocks and soil, and it strongly attaches to these materials. It can be found in the air, and high concentrations of radium exist in water. So uranium mining results in higher levels of radium in the water near these mines. And plants absorb the radium from the soil, and then the animals actually eat the plants, which accumulates radium. The radium concentration in fish and other aquatic organisms biomagnify up the food chain. So I found this information from an article when I was doing some research, and it shows multiple cases that were studied on radioactive water ingestion. And so in Iowa, there was a study that showed bone mortality rates to be higher in the people that were exposed to higher concentrations of radium-226 in their water supply. And so another study was done, and it showed increased rates of bladder cancer in men, breast cancer in women, and lung cancer in both sexes that were because of radium-226 in the water supply also. And so the radium concentration that was in the water supply was 185 MBQs per liter. Well, the U.S. EPA established a maximum contaminant level for radium, which is 5 picocuries per liter, and that's equivalent to 185 MBQs per liter. And so this was a toxic amount that these people were exposed to. And so usually in water, it should be less than 1 picocurie per liter.
So some animal studies were done using radium, and these studies were done by injecting radium and evaluating the effects on bones. Both radium-226 and radium-228 proved to change bone structure and hematopoiesis. Bone sarcomas were found in all tested species. Radium-228 is found to be twice as effective in causing these bone sarcomas than radium-226, whereas radium-226 is responsible for head carcinomas.
So this was another animal study that was performed on mice. And so they used different concentrations of radium on these mice, and the effects were evaluated. So 1.9 millicurie hour was no local effects on the skin, no sterilization, and no effect on maturity, but it accelerated the growth in the young mice. And so the next concentration is 2.4, which we also see no skin effect, but we saw permanent sterilization and also still accelerated growth in the young mice. And so the 4.9 concentration, we still saw no local effect on the skin, and we still saw permanent sterilization, but there was no evidence of accelerated growth in this dosage. And so the last dosage that was tested was 6.8, and we saw mild skin erythema and the loss of hair, and it would not grow back. And so only the females were sterilized in this study. The males were not affected, and it was because the testes were too far from the source of radium, and they were well protected by other tissues.
Radium was used for cancer treatment shortly after it was founded. It began when Dr. James Douglas took his daughter Naomi, who was diagnosed with breast cancer, to Europe for treatment of cancer by radium. Radium was used to treat skin, prostate, and gynecologic cancers. The treatment was administered in 2 different ways. First involved packing a lead box with radium and adding a hole in the box. The hole would be placed over the tumor site. Second would contain radon gas in a gas tube and would be placed into the body directly. This was the first form of internal radiation therapy. Radium was not handled properly by the doctors and scientists, and they all passed from similar diseases. This caused the cancer treatments to be ended.